The kick. Leaves it for Ward.
Ward, a great goal, 1-0!
Stoke City had never had it so bad. From the seemingly endless years back in the third tier to the Icelandic Revolution, there appeared no end to the misery suffered in the Potteries. Lowe Macari tried to bring the good times back but never truly achieved it. Then, as we welcomed a new millennium, Tony Pulis appeared.
Magic, dat gaat toch akelig gemakkelijk. En Greenhoff die overschiet.
Salmons, Greenhoff, yes! What a beautiful goal!
Turned through to him by Keegan. Fairclough on the far post waiting. There he is!
Davis and Conroy put it wide!
The glory days were over. Wembley wouldn't be frequented properly until the FA tore it down and built a fresh one, and no new major trophies would adorn the Victoria Ground's cabinets. And another title challenge? Forget about it. Stoke were on the back nine. Their finances were shot after the Butler Street stand roof collapsed in January 1976, and so necessity demanded that the club look inward. Stars like Jimmy Greenhoff were sold to keep the club afloat, and the club even had the indignity of playing home games at Vale Park for a time. George Easton was the man tasked with succeeding the great Tony Waddington, Stoke's greatest manager of all time. The former Stoke player picked them up in a desperate situation. It was obvious, though, that his task was to ease their descent down into the second division after their inevitable relegation. Much like the £10 team of the 50s and the back line of the 60s and 70s, Stoke sourced from within, and the headline name from the latest batch would be Garth Crooks, debuting in 1976. By the end of the decade, Lee Chapman, Adrian Heath and Paul Bracewell had all made their club debuts. All four would be successful in their playing careers, but none of it touched the Victoria Ground. Alan Durbin would be Easton's successor and nurtured a youthful home-based team back into the top flight, where they would participate in an annual last-ditch effort to escape relegation. With Richie Barker in the hot seat attempting to emulate Graham Taylor's Watford, in their first attempt they avoided the drop by a healthy enough 5 points. 2 years on, and with 3 points for a win now enforced, a final day win at home to West Brom kept them up. And finally, 2 years beyond that, with Bill Asprey now the coach, a Paul Maguire endorsed 4-0 win over Wolves took them above Coventry and Birmingham into safety.
Element of farce about the next goal, Chris Hemming's header merely setting up Tony Cottee for number 2.
Tottenham knowing that the draw here really isn't enough for them, and Siddle, a terrible error, and Crooks says thank you.
But their 9 lives had finally run out with a horrendously bad tally of 17 points. They could boast, if that's the right word, the 42-game record for most defeats, fewest points, fewest goals scored, most goals conceded, and finally, worst goal difference. It was a season so bad that Stoke never wore red and white pinstripes again. They had hinged on a mammoth deal with Asda to sell off car parks and training pitches that would have netted them £3 million. When that didn't work out, Bill Asprey, who suffered from a deep depression, was sacked in favour of Mick Mills. It was a minor miracle that Stoke didn't fall through the trapdoor right through to the third division, acquiring the safety of 10th, and with the first season of the playoffs to come in the 86-87 season, half a chance of a reprisal back to the big time, especially once Peter Coates was named the new owner of the club. Whilst his involvement did loosen the purse strings somewhat, and Stoke did have days like a Yuletide pumping of Leeds United 7-2, they fell just ever so slightly short of the playoffs, winding up in 8th. As a club, Stoke was still able to find talent. Steve Bould's graduation from the youth system and the identification of Bury's Lee Dixon were proof of that. Needless to say, they couldn't hold on to them for long. They were sold in the same summer to the same Arsenal for a combined £750,000. The most important act of the 1988-89 season, as it was for many, was the Hillsborough disaster, which led to the deaths of 97 Liverpool fans. In a time of introspection, Stoke held some soul-searching of their own in regards to the Victoria Ground. In what was an old, decrepit stadium, made hostile to ethnicities, women and children, plans would soon be put in place to take Stoke into the 21st century. Mick Mills' time at the club came to an end in the subsequent season. His parting gift to his successor, Alan Ball, was to sell Peter Beagrie to Everton as Ball was unable to boost morale. Consequently, Stoke descended to the third tier of the English game for the first time since 1927. So you're at your lowest point in club history, what do? A. Back your manager in the transfer market. B. Revitalise the youth system. Or C. Raise ticket prices. Of course, the third option was taken as Stoke officially posted their lowest ever return in professional football in the 1990-91 season with 14th place in the third tier. Ball was gone, Graham Paddon took care of the club until the 91-92 campaign, where a marvellous saviour was found in Lou Macari. Instantly armed with the bargains of Vince Overson, Wayne Biggins and Mark Steen, attendances were up, morale was up, results were up, but unfortunately Stoke fell just a bit short despite leading the league with 8 matches to go. But they'd finished within the playoff spots, and thanks to progressing beyond Leyton Orient and Peterborough United in what they were calling the Autoglass
repair, Autoglass replace.
I'm Gavin from Autoglass
trophy, Stoke had 3 dates with Stockport in 6 days.
The kick. Leaves it for Ward.
Ward, a great goal, 1-0!
Little nick on from Sanford now. There is a suggestion, I think the Stoke lads will think, not Steen, but one of the other forwards, possibly Big.
But that win over Stockport, the team that eliminated them from the playoffs, meant Stoke's season wasn't for naught. A trophy, even if it was as meaningless as the old Autoglass, was a momentum shifter. Up to Division 1 comfortably, it should have been a new horizon for Stoke City. Then the board stopped being so forthcoming with money for transfers, then the bargains dried up, and then, crucially, in came Celtic. For a Scot like Macari to potentially save a club he'd formerly played for, this was too hard to turn down. And when Joe Jordan didn't last, however, Macari was back, tasked with taking the club to the Premier League in spite of them being riddled with debt. After merely surviving in the 94-95 campaign, they thrived and even nearly went up in the subsequent season after open heart surgery on the team. Of course, not for the big bucks, as the club's next big idea came to fruition.
Constantly. That's good, and it's not a bad ball in either. Allison! Swept in!
Yeah, that is a new stadium if you were wondering. They called it the Britannia at a cost of £14 million, 4.5 of which came from the council, 3 came from the Football Trust, 1 came from Beer Boys McEwan's, 2.5 came from the bank, and to acquire the name, 1.3 came from Britannia Building Society. But leading them there wasn't to be Lou Macari, who had just about had it with the club. The board had sold the dynamic frontman Paul Pesci-Solido behind his back, and once the aforementioned costs for the new stadium were totted up, it meant they could hardly be competitive again in the second tier. Macari was quote-unquote stripped of his responsibilities. Maybe he protested at the convenient fee of £2.75 million to sell Mike Sherrin to QPR, which just so happened to be the sum needed by the club to complete the building of the new stadium. The Vic had bowed out with a 2-1 win over West Brom in May 1997, which had stood as the oldest continually used Football League ground in use since 1874. And no, the new place didn't harbour particularly good memories at first.
To extend their tally. An important win for Reading.
Birch with his cunning lob on the half hour. Trouble flared again outside the ground after the match. Most fans, though, were resigned to their fate.
The stereotypical Potteries wind howled on through the open-ended ground with its poor ticketing facilities, access roads and footpaths in and out. The least of their problems as Stoke plummeted back into the third tier. The supporters cried, "Coates out," so Coates obliged and was indeed out. The club also needed a new manager, and so they hired Chris Kamara, who, long before his classic japes on Soccer Saturday, told the public Stoke is a sleeping monster, we're going to build a squad for the Premier League. The The first thing he did was sell Andy Griffin to Newcastle United for £1.25 million and get sacked after 14 games. To sum up the season, Potteries, the club's hippo mascot, placed 7th in the Player of the Season awards, and to be fair, he does look like a nuisance in the box. Over £4 million in debt nowhere domestically, Stoke pulled a proverbial rabbit out of the hat when they hired former Aston Villa and Leicester boss Brian Little as manager, but when they dropped out of the playoff hunt, he sloped off to West Brom. Then Stoke's real anguish was allowed to begin. Yes, that is Stoke City floundering in the third tier playoffs, not just once but twice. They had hoped to sign a manager named Tony Pulis in the summer of '99, but he pied them off for Bristol City, so Stoke went for Gary Megson instead, and midway through the season he'd be backed up by an Icelandic consortium that hoped to awaken the sleeping giant. But after the November takeover, Megson was ditched after 22 games in favour of one of their own, Gudjon Feddersen, and in a campaign where Stanley Matthews tragically died, the haunting spectre of Stoke's season was laid to rest with another defeat in the playoffs to Gillingham. The club was flooded with Scandinavians, making the Britannia look a little bit like East Coast England in the 9th century, but the only thing Stoke pillaged was failure, losing in the playoff semi-finals again, this time to Walsall. With debts mounting and the club's financial imperative being promotion, Feddersen announced at the beginning of the 2001-2 season, "If at this time next year Stoke City are not in the first division, I am not going to be here. It's that simple."
Concentrate on the finish. Kick for his second of the season.
Good Johnson. O'Connor. It's in by O'Connor and deflected in.
Balumo got a touch. Dion Burton finds his way through, and Stoke City take the lead. We have strength up in the area for Good Johnson to find. Only needs a touch and got one.
Welcome to this time next year. Stoke City were in the first division, but Feddersen was not, as the manager was sacked a mere 72 hours after taking the club up. So the club latched onto what was groomed to be the next best thing in British coaching, Steve Cotterill, who had taken little old Cheltenham Town up to the third tier. Stoke were turning a profit, they were back in the big time-ish, so things should have been rosy.
Colin Cameron suddenly opens up for him.
Walsall 4, Stoke 2, Walsall 2.
Boothroyd running down on the Stoke goal. He's just got Steve Banks in front.
Stoke were ferociously scrabbling around for a backup. Their hot date had dumped them for a Premier League assistant's job, so they went back to someone they had courted previously. Hello, Tony Pulis. What a smashing blouse you have on.
I can't see you, obviously, but I bet you've all got smashing blouses on.
Pulis had been out of the game for 3 years, winning court battles against former employers Gillingham and Pompey. While Stoke fans didn't like the fact he was chosen, they hoped he'd just be as successful on a football pitch as well.
Could they come for Holt's right footed? Goes for Dobie again. Chescott Dobie, and there's the goal!
Survival had been claimed on the final day with a win over Reading at the Britannia. Pulis had hoped to inject some life into the dressing room via Mark Crosley, Paul Warhurst and Adi Akinbaye. Then, with another season of fighting for survival in mind, Keith Andrews, John Eustace and Ed De Hoy was acquired. Clint Hill was a bizarre one, especially as he pitched up with a broken leg, but Pulis' next signing, Jerry Taggart, as well as the easing in of Chris Commons, brightened the mood in what was a rosier mid-table finish of 11th. Happier times ahead? Not sure on that one. Chief Pulis was on a rolling contract ahead of the 04-05 season. He lost Commons to his boyhood club, Nottingham Forest, whilst recruiting well Steve Simonson in net and Michael Dewberry in defence, with the contrasting fortunes of Michael Ricketts and Kenwyn Jones up top. Everybody expected Pulis to bid the Britannia goodbye, but instead he signed a new contract. Didn't mean he wasn't sacked on June 28 for his continual failings to exploit the foreign transfer market, apparently, which reads just like the pages of my son's Football Manager saves.
Ball's moving forward with purpose again. Oh, and Courtney's in there, and
it's Danny Shitu's free kick, and the goal.
He continues his run into the area. Here's Adebola!
So in comes Johan Boskamp, a renowned coach from the Netherlands who had led Anderlecht to league titles. He was given money not afforded to Pulis, and with it, he bought players like Mamadi Sadebe and Martin Kola, as well as Luke Chadwick. The fans hadn't been happy during Feddersen's 5-3-2 era, so were unlikely to stomach a 4-5-1 brand of football that was just as dour in their mid-tableness, only in a higher division. The £900,000 signing of Sami Bangora was supposed to be the cure of all of Stoke's ills. Instead, he went to AFCON, came back late, and when he did come back, looked a shell of his former self. Combined with Boskamp fucking hating director of football John Rudge and not particularly getting on with the board either, the Boskamp era in the Potteries was nipped in the bud. Who else are you going to call in a year like 2006?
The home side had the better of the 90 minutes and opened the scoring.
Good to go past Connolly, he's done that well. Good cross from Martin, the chance for Darryl Russell.
Lawrence. And Lawrence has had a goal! And it's looped in!
The club was working with a debt of £10 million, so in came the saviour. Same as the last one, no, not Tony Pulis, but Peter Coates. He'd increased his fortune even greater by preying on gambling addicts. Good news for Pulis and Stoke though, as they could finally spend Danny Higginbottom and Ricardo Fuller for a combined $750,000 before dipping into the loan market for talent like Patrick Berger and Lee Hendry. You've probably waited for me to mention the next player's name, haven't you? Yes, Rory Delap was in from Sunderland, joining at the same time as Liam Lawrence, but he wasn't able to unleash himself at the Britannia yet, thanks to breaking his leg in only his second game for the club. In fact, the start to the season could have gone better, as the Potters won just one of their first 10 in the league, leaving them only goal difference away from relegation entering November. Form soon picked up, however, as they were 7th by New Year's Day, and they would occupy that position going into the final day of the season too. On 72 points, they trailed Southampton by the small matter of goals scored. Ultimately, they were buoyed by the fixture list presenting them with the already relegated Southend, so with their 4-1 victory outweighing Stoke's point at QPR, they would have to go again the following season. And go again they did. Two major additions were prevalent in the 2007-8 campaign. The first, a loan acquisition of Ryan Shawcross at the heart of defence. The second, of course, was Rory Delap's long throws. In the Arsenal it went, and Stoke never looked back. But they started off slow, with wins few and far between, but also losses treated with the same disdain. As 2007 became 08, however, the losses evaporated almost entirely, and the promotion race became about the free-flowing Tony Mowbray West Brom side and the battle-hardened Stoke outfit. No matter your preference, Stoke tore their promotion rivals to bits 3 days before Christmas, 3-1 at a presumably howling Britannia. Stoke simply didn't know when they were beaten. They won more games from losing positions than anybody else. None more spectacular than February's home triumph over Scunthorpe, 1 from 2 down. That result kept Stoke on top of the Championship with 13 games to play, but with Watford, Bristol City and West Brom all capable of overtaking them with their games in hand. Liam Lawrence's loan had been turned permanent, and his 15 goals were crucial in turning Stoke from also-rans to leading the pack. Further to that idea, Shawcross's loan went the same way for £1 million, as Glenn Whelan was in from Sheffield Wednesday to bolster that midfield. However, nerves were being frayed all over the second tier, as Stoke won just 2 of their next 9 games and yet still remained in the top 2 of the division. Encapsulating the incredible Championship campaign was Bristol City, leading the league on April the 7th with a neutral goal difference. They would be beaten 12 days later at the Britannia, all but eliminating them from the automatic race. All that was required from the final day was a point at home to Leicester City, who still required a result themselves to avoid the drop. There weren't to be goals, as Stoke went up, Leicester went down, and both would be experiencing very different 2008-9 campaigns. Middlesbrough, Swindon, Crystal Palace, Leicester, Bolton, Sunderland, Barnsley, Nottingham Forest, Charlton, Watford, Manchester City, West Brom, Wolves, Norwich, Sheffield United and Derby. This was the history that Stoke wanted to avoid. Premier League teams that had immediately gone straight back down. To avoid that, Pulis went big in the market. Higginbottom was back, and joining him was the much-needed goalkeeping stability of Thomas Sorensen, and alongside him was Ibrahim Sonko in defence, Seyit Olifajana in midfield, and Dave Kitson up front. Top-flight football finally came to the Britannia on August 23rd, and the last-minute goal was instructive for a whole host of reasons. Firstly, Delap's throwing got its first airing in a top-flight setting, and it also showed just how strong and how never say die Stoke really were. Whilst the first thing when you saw this video instantly was Rory Delap throwing, don't lie, they would only score 9 of their 38 goals from such situations this season. There were also beautiful goals from Ricardo Fuller, notably a volley against Villa which won August's goal of the month, and also once he arrived in January, James Beattie being a little bit prolific in bagging a 2-in-1 goal ratio. Another name in through the door that January was Matthew Etherington, offering even more quality out wide and another outlet for what was still a direct and rambunctious team. Few were able to live with them, particularly at the windswept Britannia. Arsenal, far from their beastly days of 2025, were waif-like in their November defeat. Even champions of England and champions of Europe, Manchester United, struggled there on Boxing Day. And while safety was only mathematically confirmed with a win at Hull City, you had to say that they never really looked like going down. Whilst their opponents on May the 9th may well have shot out of the blocks, quick gaining heroic wins at places like Arsenal, they were only in the division again the following season thanks to defeats of others on the final day, not for anything that they ever did.
He hurls it in. There's Fuller from Danielson, who can't stay with him. There's the cross. Fuller. Top for Stoke there. Here's Etherington. Whitehead is at the far post, and Stoke City lead.
There you go, have another win over Arsenal at the Britannia for the road. That would be their second in as many games, and whilst it was a cup run that continued beyond the 4th round and even the 5th against the oiled money of Manchester City, sadly Stoke's cup heroics were thwarted in the final 8 by the eventual double winners, Chelsea. It was another season of spending exorbitant amounts of money just to hang in the division, but in a trio of £5 million deals on Dean Whitehead, Robert Hoof and Tunkai, they delivered a spine running right through the team. Added to those names were the deadline day deals for Danny Collins in September and another goalkeeper in Asmir Begovic in February. It was a season that mirrored their first efforts, one fewer win but harder to beat, with a couple more points on the board and a rise of 1 position. The rest of the league had clearly adapted to Pulis' tactics, but in turn Stoke had also adapted to the division, improving on the road to wins at places like White Hart Lane, Craven Cottage, Fratton Park and Upton Park.
First minute of extra time, lovely ball in, oh, and there's the finish. And Walters, he's already got one and he's denied him a second one there, but Walters has kept it in and he's...
through Robinson. Etherington with a fan decided here, Matt, as to whether Jaskalainen should have done better. The effort they're making or non-effort they're making, what a pass it is. Wanted it because this was an outstanding. Wilkinson with a little touch there.
And as you can see from that footage, Stoke's 3rd Premier League season was far from the talking point now. Stoke had become furniture in the top division, acquiring 46 points, maintaining the same standards across the board, maintaining their balance between home and away displays, and with a sprinkling of shock results against teams like Everton, Liverpool and, naturally, Arsenal. No more shocking though than their semi-final evisceration in the FA Cup of Bolton Wanderers. Of course they were over their Sam Allardyce peak, but after Stoke had vanquished West Ham, Brighton, Wolves and Cardiff, and the other semi-final contained a Manchester derby, Stoke entered Wembley again as heroes. They would be given the chance to shock the world and bring home the club's 2nd major trophy.
Manchester City folklore. We thought Yaya Toure hit his effort in the first half hard. Yaya Toure ending the long wait for a trophy for Manchester City.
While Stoke look better placed than they have done for a decade under the current management of Mark Robins, go watch our first video on Stoke for even happier times.